Hi, Iffy. How are you?
I'm good. How's it going?
Going very well. So, for those that are going to be watching this, my name is Ezenwanyi Abii from Abii and Associates or Abii Legal in Houston, Texas. And today I'm chatting with Iffy Ibekwe from Ibekwe Law. Iffy, tell us a little bit about you and your practice.
I am a 14-year attorney and I practice estate planning in Austin, Texas. And I help intentional people set up wills, trusts, and other legal documents so that they can protect themselves and their loved ones in case of emergency or death.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I like the key tag on intentional people because estate planning is one of those areas where you have to, a lot of times people come to attorneys when there's a problem, and estate planning is one of those spaces where you usually come to people before there is an issue because you want to get ahead of the situation.
Exactly.
So given the current climate and everything else going on now, COVID-19, coronavirus, and all of that, what have you seen in the space of estate planning and your clientele? Have you seen any changes in the clients that come to you, or are people really being a lot more intentional, or is it more of an emergency? Here is a crisis, we need to attend to things now. What have you noticed in your practice?
I have noticed more of people having a come to Jesus moment, so to speak. Not
Mm-hmm.
that they're in a current emergency, but they now are in a space where they can sit at home. They have time to think about life, what would happen to their stuff, themselves, their children, whatever their situation is,
Yeah.
if something like this pandemic was to hit them. And it has been very steady business that I've had since this COVID outbreak. And what I'm getting is a lot of people saying, I have put this off way too long and I just have to do this. So that's why I contacted you.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine it's definitely wakes you up. Come to Jesus moment is it's one way to look at it because it does
For
alert
real.
you, especially when you have kids, right? There are
Yeah,
some things where you've worked your whole life, you've put things in place, but you haven't actually organized it or tried to do things in a way that makes it easier for your children to manage yourself and yourself.
right.
So on a very high level, what would you say are the most, so there are different components to an estate plan, of course, the wills, the trust, medical directives, and all of that. What would you say are the most relevant things that everyone should think about, young or old? Because sometimes I do some estate planning in my practice as well, and sometimes young people seem to not think they need certain things, right? They say, "Oh,
Yeah,
I don't really have a lot of stuff. I don't need a will. It doesn't matter. Maybe I'll just do a medical directive because that would tell my parents what to do,
right.
what I desire." What would you say are the basic components for an estate plan that everyone should think about, young or old? And then if you were to say, what are some specific things that maybe younger people should consider? What would you say those things are?
I think this is a fantastic question because people often just say, oh, I just need this part, or I just need a power of attorney for this thing. And they don't see it as a holistic plan of action. And so, if you ask me what the five basic documents that everyone needs would be, I would start with your last will and testament, which
Mm-hmm.
is what you think of when you think of a will. And that document says, here's my stuff, this is who I want it to go to. And it doesn't go into effect until you die. In that document, if you have children, also allows you to have something set up called a testamentary trust,
Mm-hmm.
where you can state um, who you'd want to take care of your children, how they should be taken care of, all within your will. And
Yeah.
that would only go into effect upon death as well. And this is a huge component because a lot of people just want to leave things to their children. But if they're minors,
Yeah.
they need somebody to help them manage that before they can receive that property. And that's a huge thing that ends up getting people to lose lots of assets, or just have that limbo situation.
Mismanagement. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just because you didn't set it up for your kid to receive it.
Yeah.
um, then you also need a financial power of attorney. A financial power of attorney allows you to designate someone to be an agent to make certain financial decisions on your behalf. This can be very broad or very limited powers, and you control how much access you give people.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be incapacitated or unconscious for it to go into effect. It can go into effect immediately, or it can be in effect upon a triggering event. Like if you are incapacitated, then it would set in. If you don't have one, then you're going to be stuck in a situation where have anyone help you financially.
Mm-hmm.
I volunteer for a cancer law clinic, and one of my clients at the clinic, it's a pro bono, so it's a free clinic for people who've had or currently are battling cancer.
Okay.
One lady came in because she had been in the hospital unexpectedly for 2 months. And in those 2 months, she wasn't able to pay for her house. And she almost lost her house because she was just in a coma.
Right.
And she hadn't gone in thinking she wouldn't come out. But the first thing she did when she came out, she said, I need an immediate power of attorney because should something like this happen to me again, I don't want to lose my house
Right.
over the bank not hearing from me just because somebody doesn't have access to my account or checkbook.
Right.
And so she set her brother in place so that that sort of thing could be taken care of. And that's a very practical application of a financial power of attorney.
Yeah.
The other power of attorney is a medical power of attorney, and that only goes into effect if you are unable, if you're incapacitated, and you cannot consent for yourself. And what you would do for that agent is pick someone that is um, someone who you would trust as if they could make decisions on your behalf. They know you, they know maybe your religious views, they know your moral values, they know what kind of medical interventions you'd want because they're going to act as if they were you in that medical situation. The next medical document is a living will. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people think a living will is a last will and
The
testament.
last
These
will, right?
names aren't great. It's also called an advance directive because you can in advance direct your family on how you would want to be treated if you're ever in a terminal condition
Right.
or a serious medical condition where you can't consent for yourself. You can let them know, I would like to have artificial feeding or breathing, or I don't want any of that. I just want medicine and
Mm-hmm.
let me go at that point. I don't want to be hooked up to a machine.
Right.
Now, in light of COVID, we're having a lot of situations where doctors are seeing. I read this in the, I think it was in the Huffington Post. There was a intensive care unit, COVID unit,
Mm-hmm.
where out of 55 patients, only one of them had an advance directive. In one instance that the doctor described,
Yeah.
um, she said that the patient was 30 years old and not going to recover from his injuries due to the virus. And
Right.
his parents were fighting over whether they should just unplug him and see how he does, um, or continue to sustain him like with breathing, even though he was essentially in a vegetative state at that
Right.
point, gone, but still able to breathe if you allow it with a machine. And
Right.
that's the kind of thing that no doctor wants to deal with, no parent wants to deal with, no child wants to deal with for their parent, no loved one wants to deal with on behalf of another one. And the last thing you want is your family falling apart because they don't know what to do with you. If you
Right.
give them advanced direction, then you can let them know, should I be in this situation? This is what I would want. Don't
Exactly.
make it your decision. Please respect my wishes.
Right.
And then the last one is a Hipaa directive, and it's what you think of when you go to the doctor or dentist office. Essentially, just says, here are the people who can have access to my medical records or prognosis or from the hospital. They don't have to jump through hoops to find out what's going on with me. And it's so simple. You've done it a lot,
Right.
but this is like a full directive that would cover every scenario. And so that's something I offer my clients when they're setting up an estate plan. So
Right.
those five documents: your last will and testament, medical and financial power of attorney, your living will, advance directive, and your Hipaa directive are the five must-have documents for everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that because that is, and as you mentioned, in a lot of cases, people don't realize that they may need them, right? I
Right.
mean, COVID, of course, highlights how relevant that may be in this current situation. But as given, accidents happen, things happen.
Yes.
A lot of times people don't think of other scenarios where this might come up. It's just that
Right.
this situation has highlighted the urgency for it. Because
Yeah, absolutely.
something else that you and I have discussed a couple of times so far is our heritage being Nigerian and
Hmm.
sometimes having parents who either have wills in Nigeria and other countries. I mean, whoever is watching this, but having parents who have things in another country who may have a will, may not have a will, and do not necessarily have the same legal requirements or establishments that the US has. How
Hmm.
exactly, I'm sure if you've come across that in your practice, how do you advise those clients? How do you advise them in terms of setting things up? and in terms of really effectuating anything that they have there or here. Have you come across that, and really how have you tried to, maybe your parents have been in a similar situation, how
Yeah.
you
Well,
advise?
I'll start with my parents. So my dad passed away 16 years ago this April, and the first thing my mom did after having to go through the whole process of closing up his estate because he didn't have a will was she got all of her estate planning done. And that was 16 years ago. I was still in law school. I didn't even know anything about this area of the law or that I would end up
That
here.
you end up here,
And
right?
I remember thinking, that seems really drastic.
Yeah.
But now I really realize, like she said, she just didn't want her kids to have to go through all of the nonsense
Right.
and hoops of finding a lawyer, going to probate his estate with no will, which means that you have to prove up all these things, figuring out everything. Thankfully, my dad's estate was simple in Louisiana, where my family was when my dad passed away. My mom inherited everything and no one was fighting and there was no contest in that. But the better thing to do and the less expensive thing to do is to actually just do a will, because then you just go to court and say, these are their wishes. You follow out their wishes and you present it to court in the probate process. And it's so much simpler, faster, cheaper.
Right.
When people come from other countries, this is not just Nigerians, like you said, this could be any
Anyway.
foreigner, any immigrant. I don't even limit it to immigrants, but in this instance, like any immigrant, say you have an estate plan that you've done in Nigeria or in India or in some other place, that estate plan does not control your assets and your life here in the United States. Just like if you set up an estate plan here, I can't say what should happen to your grandfather's house that you inherited in Nigeria and your village, or some business that you own in India. You actually have to do a separate estate planning for every place where you have property. And that shocks people because they just think, oh, you just do one will.
We have
But the
something
law,
to be
yeah,
useful, right?
yeah, there, but wherever you are, the law is not the same everywhere, and we don't have the jurisdiction to control other countries or even other states sometimes. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Wonderful to have something abroad, but if you have a situation where your parents have that, make sure they know that they need to do something here in the United States as well. If they have nothing in the United States and nothing abroad, they certainly want to make sure that they get at least those 5 basic documents set up in place, because if not, it's either going to be the surviving spouse and a lot of times the children that are left holding the bag and the financial bag to pay for closing up an estate. And that can cause a lot of fighting. And say you have no money, but they end up selling off your loved one's estate to pay legal fees, because they'll do that. Whatever assets you do have, that can be reached in order to settle your estate. And that is what you don't want. And that's how a lot of people miss on passing wealth to the next generation, because it all goes to lawyers' fees and debts, instead of to your loved ones.
And a lot of times, I just had a recent case, people do not realize that going to prove up the will in court, even if you do have a will, that is a process in itself.
Yes.
And that does cost money. And that's not something, oh, we have a will, so we're fine. No, you still need to go through the probate process to probate the will. And people don't always understand that process, right? Because sometimes it becomes, okay, so if I have a will and I still have to do this, then what's the point, right? So can you give some information about how you advise someone around that? Because I generally try to talk to people about trusts and really the differences between a trust and a will and what things can go through a trust if that's something they're trying to avoid. But from your experience, how do you manage that conversation if it comes up? Like, do you mean to tell me we're going to pay and do this, and then after this, if something should happen, we still have to do A, B, and C?
Right. Yeah, I look at it like anything that you pay. We all pay car insurance and pay it monthly for years. Health insurance monthly for years, and sometimes never use it. You never get a kickback. You just have to put a value on this process. It's not something you pay monthly, but yes, there will be fees associated with closing up your estate. Either you pay for it, your loved one pays for it, or your estate pays for it ultimately. And that could be more than financially when it comes to a loved one, because the agony of having to close down someone's life when you're grieving, there is no money price that you put on that. So there are three things. First, I'll talk about what happens when you die with no will.
Mm-hmm.
If you die with no will, it means that you die intestate. And that means that the state can decide wherever you live, it's different in different states, how your property should pass on because you've given them no instruction. So if you've had a falling out with a child or a parent or someone like that, they can get your estate. You have no control over who gets your property. If that's something that makes you feel okay, then don't do a will. For most people, you're going to have something or want to have some kind of instruction on how to pass on the things that you've worked for in this life, and that's the benefit of doing a will. If you pass with a will, you have to go through a process called probate. In Texas, it's not super hard, okay? You go to court, your executor basically notifies the court that this person has passed away and I want to be put on as a person who closes up their life.
Yeah.
And they go through a process and it takes a few months for them to present certain documents, to contact the banks and all the people that have your accounts and just close down everything. And they have the opportunity to do so because you've designated them in your will and also given them the right to be so involved in the closing down of your life.
Mm-hmm.
They also make sure that, okay, this person gets this and this person gets my prize collection of shoes, or this person is going to be the one who gets the house and we can redeed it to them. And do the deeds, and all those things are going to be part of the process. Just because you have a will doesn't make it easier, but it makes it streamlined, which makes it easier,
Right.
Than dying without a will. If
And
you have
takes away the emotions, pardon the interruption, it takes away the emotions of handling that process, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people forget that that's really what, I think that's a big advantage of this area of practice, that it reduces the infighting, confusion, emotion,
Yes.
with any of those documents you mentioned earlier. It takes away some of the emotional, discourse within the family that comes up.
Oh, and hell hath no fury like a family fighting over stuff, okay? It's the tale as old as time, biblical fights over property. And we all can think of like some either personal or fictional story where you have seen examples of people fighting over the dumbest things. And no parent wants your child to fight. No child wants their parents to fight. You don't want to fall out with your siblings.
Right.
You don't want to fall out with your loved ones because you disagree.
Nobody wants that. Especially
nobody wants
when
that.
you're dealing with a bigger issue that's just happened. You don't want
Yes.
that. Yeah.
And I always think of like my clients, and the things that cause some of them to come in is a fight. My brother did this. My mom was getting really sick and he cleaned her out and took all of her stuff, changed the deed to all these things that can be done that are abuses of just power and just greed that happens when people have stuff. It could be a house, it could be a car, it could just be, anything. It could be over a yearbook. And you'd be shocked what triggers people and what rights they feel like they have to property.
Right.
And so those are the reasons why it's just never worth it. I also tell my clients in these situations when they're creating an estate plan to make sure they have a conversation with the people who are going to be involved. They know who is likely to be the fighting type, or which kid might be upset that they weren't chosen to do this. It's awkward sometimes, but I'll even sit with families and help them explain what things are what and why they're done that way, if that's a benefit to my clients. Because you can do it all and never tell anybody, and then they are shocked that you have chosen them. That is not ideal.
And whoever presents the will, right? That's where the contests come in. Like, all of a sudden, why did mom or dad pick you? Even though I think they loved me more. Right?
Exactly. Or I was talking to mom in Christmas of 2015, and she told me that I was supposed to be this and get that, and it was never written down. And now you have a will maybe that doesn't say anything like that. And it could be easily contested or just cause a breakup in the family. And it's not worth it.
Absolutely.
It's not worth it. In fact, on that, picking the executor, the people to designate to be your agents, say for financial and medical, you don't want to pick somebody who's bankrupt to do your financial power of attorney. You don't want to pick somebody who's super disorganized and can't get anything,
Right.
meet deadlines to do your executor role, because that's all about meeting deadlines and being organized and having receipts.
Right.
You don't want someone who's really super cold and can't stand going to hospitals or dealing with anything medical to take care of your medical stuff. So just use common sense. And if you have lots of options, pick people with the strengths to do the things that they do best.
Yeah. Thanks for
If you
sharing those.
can.
Thanks for sharing those thoughts. I think I may have redirected you. Earlier, you were talking about two
Uh,
things. One, dying interstate, and then secondly, having a will. You didn't get to the third part before
the
I
third, yes. Thank you for
so.
bringing me back. I'm always going down rabbit holes. The
Oh no,
third would be
I
to
started.
get a living trust. It's called a revocable living trust. And this is a mechanism that you can use to retitle some of your assets.
Yeah.
Um, and I won't go into super detail, but essentially it lets you avoid going through the probate process in court. You go to court just to say that everything's going to be handled privately. So if you think of a will and just going to court, that's like a state-run probate process. You can have a private one if you do a living trust. I don't do these a lot because I find that a lot of my clients don't need them. But in situations where people have blended families or children from another marriage, or if they pass away and they're afraid that their spouse would remarry, you can set up these sorts of things so that your kids aren't ever disinherited, or certain family members will definitely get your assets if you pass away before you think
Right.
you're going to, and you can manage it while you're alive, and that's the beauty of it. And
Yeah.
just think of a trust as a bank account. A revocable one is one that you can put whatever you want in and
Mm-hmm.
take whatever you want out. There's another kind called irrevocable, which I'm not even going to go into, and
Right.
that one is
That gets
sealed.
complicated as we
That's
build.
way, you need to call an attorney if you're in need of something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, those are the three ways that you can do it.
Thank you.
Or
Really.
some people just let it sit. And there is a fourth way that you can do it, but that, if it's over
That,
4 years in Texas, it's a whole other process. So it gets
that
even harder if you just ignore
that's
it.
not the one of the ways to do it. That is the way we don't want you to do it.
No.
Sure. But yeah, you are right. Sometimes people just either out of exhaustion or frustration, they don't necessarily attend to what they need to attend, and that's
Right.
what happens. Okay, well, thank you for taking the time to just talk to me about this. As I mentioned, this was an opportunity to really go into the details for your clients, my clients, any other person when we share this that finds value in it. It just helps to get the breakdown of what's required in the estate planning process and how things work. And I will ask for your handle on social media. Should anyone have, you're in the Austin area, I'm in Houston, but should anyone have any questions or anything to follow up with you, where can they find you?
You can find me at the Just In Case Lawyer,
I like
because
the
I deal with just in case situations.
yeah.
And so I am available throughout the state of Texas. So
Okay.
if you find yourself needing any help, specifically Texas legal advice, hit either of us up, because that's our state.
Yeah. And you can find me on Abii Legal, Abiiilegal. And thank you, guys.